Hello दोस्तों, how are you all? I hope you guys are good. So दोस्तों, today topic is all about Docker architecture. So we learn in today videos what is Docker architecture and each and everything about Docker architecture, like what is Docker client, what is Docker host, what is registry, what is Docker daemon, containers, images, and all about things. In my previous video, I've already covered what is like Docker daemon, what is Docker features, what containers versus virtual machine, what is virtual machine, and disadvantages of Docker, why Docker, what is Docker. So everything is clear in my previous two video, right? And if you not watch this that video, so please watch. And I start today. What is Docker architecture? So first is here client. So what is client, right? So basically I read this Docker client. Docker users can interact with Docker daemon through a client, and I have already covered in the previous video what is Docker daemon. Docker daemon is nothing. Docker daemon runs on the host operating system and it is responsible for running containers to manage Docker service. Okay, so basically that is called Docker daemon. So Docker users can interact with the Docker daemon through a client. Okay, so the Docker client uses command and REST API to communicate with Docker daemon. Okay, so when a client runs any Docker command on the Docker client terminal, the client terminal send this Docker commands to the Docker daemon. Okay, so Docker client uses command line interface. Command line interface we are all know, and what is command line interface. So to the running following commands. So first Docker build, next Docker pull, and third is Docker run. Basically it is a command. Okay, so next is what is Docker host. So Docker host is used to provide an environment to execute and run application. It contains the Docker daemons like image, containers, network, and storage. Okay, basically Docker host is provide you to an environment where you run your application, right? Where you run your image, where you build your image, create a containers like this. Okay, so next is Docker registry. So what is Docker registry? Docker registry manages and stores the Docker images. There are two types of registry. First is public registry and second one is private registry. So what is public registry? And you are already know what is Docker hub, right? So that is called public registry. Okay, so public registry is also called as Docker hub. Okay, and the next is private registry. It is used to share image within the enterprises. Basically in Docker hub there is public or private, right? Like github you can use github as a private account and as a public, right? So in Docker hub it is same. So when you use Docker hub as a public account, so you not pay for that, and when you use this account as a private, so you pay for that. Basically that's the difference between public registry and private registry. So I hope that's clear. So next is Docker images. So what is Docker images? They are executable packages bundled with application code and dependencies, software packages, etc. to create container. Okay, so I read this, but I will define what is Docker images. So just for understanding purpose, like a Docker images is a package or template that contains all the necessary files, code, libraries, dependencies, and configuration required to run an application. So it is called basically Docker images. So I hope this is clear what is Docker images. Next is Docker containers. So we can say that the image is a template and the container is a copy of that template. It is so simple, guys. Easily memorize this thing, like what is Docker container. So in one word we can say just like a image is a template and that image and container is a copy of that template. That's it. Okay, so next is what is Docker file. So it is a text file that has all commands which need to be run for build a given image. Okay, so in basic, whatever command you need to build any image, you simply write in the file. Okay, so that is called Docker file. So I have this is clear, this in this picture. Firstly you write a Docker file, then build this file, then when you build this file it is create a Docker image, and when you run this image it create a container. So it's very simple, right? So in what circumstance will you lose data stored in a container? So it's a very important questions, right? So the data of a container remains in it until and unless you delete the container. So in simple word we can say, just like when you not delete your container or your crash your container, so in that case your data is safe, right? But in any condition you lost your container, so your data is lost. Okay, so basically next is what is Docker image registry. So basically Docker image registry in simple terms in an area where Docker images are stored. Okay, clear this thing. Instead of converting the application to containers every time, our developers can directly use the image stored in the registry. This image registry can either be public or private. I've already told this, right? And Docker Hub is the most popular and famous public registry available. Okay, so next is how many Docker components are there, right? So what is Docker components? So basically your Docker components is your Docker client, Docker host, and Docker registry. And I have already covered this thing, like what is Docker client, what is Docker host, and what is Docker registry, right? So you know, right, what is Docker client, what is Docker host, and what is Docker registry. But I read this. The Docker client communicates with the Docker host. Docker clients communicate with the Docker host to build and run Docker containers. Okay, so next is the Docker host is where the containers are hosted and their associated images are stored. Okay, so next is the Docker registry is a centralized place where Docker image can be stored, shared, and managed. That is called Docker registry. Where your images are stored, that is called Docker registry. What is Docker client? Docker client is communicate with Docker host, right? So here is Docker client is communicate with Docker host. And what is Docker client? So I have already told Docker client. Docker users can interact with Docker daemons through a client. So I hope this is clear to everyone. And if you like the video, then please share it everyone where you want, and please subscribe my channel. And let's meet again tomorrow with a new video. Till then, bye bye. Take care, dosto.